Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode on the DevMarketer channel. This series, we're going to be talking about getting started with Git. Little play on words there, getting started with Git. Just thought I had fun with that. But anyway, it's all about Git. It's the basics of using Git and all that kind of stuff. So in this video, we're going to talk about actually installing Git, a little bit about what Git does for those of you guys that don't know about Git, and then getting it configured. So in the next video, we can actually dive into starting to commit some work and cloning or initializing repositories and actually using Git itself. So it's all about the config. Let's get started. All right, so many of you guys might still be wondering what Git does. It's kind of unclear. We know that every web developer uses it, but what exactly does it do? Well, what it does is it's a very, very handy tool for any web developer. As your source projects become very, very large, being able to track every single character of code becomes very, very important in these projects, especially as you start working with other people. So Git can be valuable for a single developer, but it's even more valuable for teams of developers. It allows you to see who wrote what code. It allows you to see who removed stuff, who added stuff, and all that kind of feature. And it's all built in, it tracks it all, and it does it really quickly and very efficiently. Very low memory and all that kind of stuff. So Git's a very, very powerful tool. Most importantly, it allows you to track changes and track versions. Every time you commit something, you're saving a new version, and at any time in history, anyone can go back and reload it at the state that it was in at that very version, okay? So it's very powerful how you can move around and do stuff like that. It also allows for non-distractive functions and non-distractive rollback. So basically, like, I can create a branch and I can start working and playing with code that I know might break the project, but I can play with it. And if it does break the project, I can simply roll back, no harm, no foul, and I can even break it while someone else is working on their local machine doing something else, and when I break it, they're working on basically their own version of it and their own branch and not break it. So it gets very, very powerful, especially with multiple teams, but even when you work for yourself, I work by myself a lot and I still find Git incredibly useful. Okay, last thing is it allows for easier and more secure deployment. Back in the day, we used to use FTP for deployment, but now with Git, we can deploy to a server not only way faster, but more securely. We can use SSH to log in. We can do Git. We can also roll back at any time, which you can't do with FTP. When you did FTP, you changed all the files on that program. And if you wanted to roll back, you had to hope that you had a backup on your local computer and you would just overwrite everything again, but you could only override stuff. With Git on your production server, you can roll back if something breaks, and I've seen this happen in the production environment. We're having problems, we don't know what the problem is. We roll back to the last version we knew worked instantly, and it just works like that. The server can just roll back like that without needing to do another massive transfer. We can fix the changes now and then roll another version out. So Git becomes very, very powerful. Now, when I talked about how you can track and see every change in a Git application, this is a perfect example. This comes from GitHub. It's what we call a diff file, D-I-F-F. Like a differentiation file, a difference file. And basically it shows what was added and what was removed. You can see all these red lines here were removed, and all these green lines have been added. So it allows you to see that basically we had some basic CSS files, and someone basically added a media query and added back in these CSS files inside of a media query. It allows me to see that almost instantly, which is very difficult to do otherwise. So it's extremely, extremely powerful. Now, Git itself runs in two different places. Every person on your team will have a version on their local computer, and we're going to talk about how to install that on your local computer in the next here in just a couple seconds. But you're going to have a version on your local computer, and then you're going to have a version on some sort of server, which we call a repository. Okay, so that repository can have multiple Git files or Git repositories on it, and GitHub is a common repository that stores public Git repos. So it's a server basically that runs all these things, that stores it, that allows us to manage all of our Git repos on there. And then we all have versions on our local computers. So I can throw everything up on GitHub, and if you wanted to try my project, you could then download it to your local version, manipulate it on your local version, and then request to submit it back to GitHub. So we always have this server version that's in the cloud usually, and it doesn't need to be GitHub. It could be other providers like Bitbucket or GitLab, or it could also be your own server, and you can just install Git directly. It could be your production server is another example. And anyway, it allows us to track every single change ever made in history through the server, and then the local versions can basically clone or download or pull the changes down and sync up with the server, but the server is kind of like the master copy. Now we're going to start by learning about the local version. In the next 4 or 5 videos, we're going to work on manipulating at the local level, and then we'll talk about deploying onto the server and how to pull back and do all that kind of stuff as well. So that's what we'll hit up in this series. Now, before we get started anymore, let's go ahead and get Git installed, all right? So let's install Git on your computer. We're going to talk about it for Mac, Windows, and Linux, so let's get started on that. First of all, really quick on Mac, it's super easy on Mac. I'm going to have a link down here in the description that you can click with more detailed instructions if you need them, but it's going to go to this website here, this git-scm, which is that's the main website for the Git technology. Keep in mind that the Git technology is an open source technology. GitHub is a private company that runs a Git server with social networking type features in it, but it's basically like a Facebook or like a Twitter or something. It's a private company that's running a developer social network and with Git features. Private company. Git itself is an open source technology, okay? They're not the same, and a lot of people get them confused. Okay, so on the official technology website, which is git-scm.com, you can find more information on how to download it for Mac. Basically, you download an install file, just like what you see here, just like any Mac user has seen before. This is your basic install file, and you just run the installer, and you'll have Git installed. Now, for those of you guys that already have Xcode, if you've been using Xcode or you have Xcode, you might already have Git installed on your system. When you finish these next couple slides here, I'll show you how to check if you have Git installed or not. But if you need to get installed, this is the easiest way to do it. You can just run this installer, or if you have Xcode, you can just run developer tools in Xcode, and it will download Git as well. Okay, if you're on Linux, you already have a package manager that came with your computer, so you're going to use your terminal to download Git. Okay, so if you've got the yum package manager, here's an example on how you would do it. You can just do sudo yum install git-all. Git-all is the Git program. And then if you got the apt-get package manager, you'll just do sudo apt-get install git-all. Okay, so pretty basic stuff. You're just installing this package called git-all. All right, I'll have a link in the description for where you can see more commands here at the git-scm website. And that actually has commands for every distribution of Linux. So if you're not sure what you've got, you can actually see the command that you can install. Now, lastly, Git installed on Windows used to be a lot trickier. Thanks to the fellows at GitHub, the private company, GitHub, they've built some tools that allow Git to be installed on Windows much easier. The best one, the one I'd basically recommend for right now is git-for-windows.github.io. So I'll link this down in the description. This is the one you're going to want to install. It's got the shell manager and stuff like that. Another option is this graphical client that GitHub has made for Windows. When you install the graphical client, it also installs this program here. But I just prefer, for right now, you can go ahead and install this, and then you can get the graphical interface later. All right, but that's how you're going to install it for Windows. Again, all these links in the description. Moving on, let's talk about how to use Git. Well, we're going to use Git in the terminal in this series. And there's a reason for that, and that's because that's kind of how you're supposed to learn Git. Git is originally built for the command line. That's its original application use. It's also, if you ever need help, you get on Stack Overflow, you're stuck with Git in any way, no one's ever going to give you instructions for how to use a graphical program. They're always going to give you instructions on how to do it through the terminal. So you need to know how to use the terminal and command lines first. And then if you want to use a graphical program later, then by all means go for it. But you need to learn the terminal. And you'll also find that the terminal is faster than the graphical interfaces by far, and it's just quicker to do to your different things. It's quicker to type these commands sometimes than to try to mess around with clicking the buttons and highlighting things and checkboxes and all sorts of stuff like that. So I do want to go over really briefly, if you are interested in any of the graphical interfaces, we won't talk about them in the series, but these are some of the ones that you might want to check out. Git-Kraken is a new one that I actually have never used before. It looks slick as hell. It's cross-platform, available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. It's free, and it looks very, very full-featured. Really nice design, a dark kind of design. It looks really, really cool. That's one you might want to check out. And then again, links for all these in the description. Next is SourceTree. SourceTree I've used before. I usually use the terminal, but sometimes when things get really tricky and complicated and I'm trying to visualize branches and stuff a little bit more, then I'll open up SourceTree. SourceTree is made by Atlassian. They're the same people that make HipChat, that make Bitbucket, and they also make Jira. If you've used Jira at any sort of project, it's like a massive, massive project manager tool. So they make a program called SourceTree. Once again, it's free. It's Mac and Windows, no Linux, Mac and Windows, and it's a really good, clean interface. It's light colored. It's easy to use. I find it really simple to use for a Git client. There aren't very many windows. You can kind of see everything right there, so it's pretty good. Next is Tower. This is available for Mac only. Tower's been around since before any of these other graphical interfaces were. So it's a premium product. It costs money. It's $69 for a license, $35 for an upgrade. So it's expensive, no doubt. It used to be the best option by far. However, these other programs have now come out in the last year or so and kind of made Tower a less appealing option because of the money that it costs. It has a similar interface, in my opinion, to SourceTree, like almost identically, and it's $69. But I just want to throw it out there because it's a popular option for many hardcore Mac enthusiasts. Last but not least is GitHub itself has decided to make GitHub clients, desktop clients, so we call it GitHub Desktop. Available here, again, all these links in the description, but desktop.github.com. It's available on Windows and Mac, it's free, and it allows you to track all these changes. I haven't personally used this, but I will be doing reviews on all these applications at the end of the series, okay? So once again, we're gonna be focusing on the terminal. Let's go ahead and configure our client. Let's get it started in the terminal. Let me show you how to check if you have Git. I want you to go ahead and install Git, and then we'll get it configured so that we can actually start doing some stuff with Git in the next video. Okay, so first things first, what I want to do is in our terminal, I want you to simply type Git, G-I-T. Now, when you type Git, you're going to see either an error message saying it can't find this symlink or something, or you're going to get a whole bunch of this crap, which is your help file. If you get the help file, you know you have Git installed, you're good to go. You can continue on with this tutorial. If you get the error message, you need to go down to the description, choose your operating system, and follow the instructions to download Git for your operating system. When you're done with that, you can come back to this video and then learn about configuring your file real quick before you move into part 2. Okay, next let's talk about configuring your file. So git config is your global config file. Every Git installation has a global config file. This is the default configurations for your Git, everything you do with Git. So we're going to be setting our user.name and our user.email, and these are the signatures used on every single commit in Git, which we'll talk about what commits are in the next video, but every time you submit a version, it signs it with your name and your email address. And so this is going to be the public name and email address that you use whenever you sign anything, any sort of commit, all right? So we're gonna set those. There's other configs as well, such as colors of branches, your default pushes and stuff like that. But we're gonna focus on those 2 configs. Those are the ones you need to get started. And the other thing to remember with the config file is there's a global config, which is what we're setting, which is all gonna be all of your defaults for this computer. But on a project per project basis, you can actually create a different config file if you want inside the project's Git folder, and that way just that one project can have different information. So if you're using a work email address for that one project, then you can have a project config file, and then whenever you commit that project, it uses that file instead of your global config file, okay? So that's the option, but we're gonna set the global one right now. Okay, so to get started, what we're gonna do is we're gonna do git config -- list. And this is going to list all of the options that you have set in your config file. If you have nothing, then you're going to want to go ahead and set it up. which I'll show you here in a second. Otherwise, you'll see if you've got everything and if it's what you want to keep, okay? In this case, I've got all the information that I want. I want to keep it this way, but I just wanted to show you guys how you can access it and see what's in your config file. Now, if we head back over and look at what we were doing before, once again, I want to show you that you can do git config, and then git config -l or -- list will list all your config settings, okay? Now to set those config files, this is what you're going to want to do. You're going to do git config -- global. This sets your global config instead of your local config. And then you're going to do the configuration file that you want. In this case, it's going to be user.name. This is going to be the name that's attached to all your signatures. In quotations, you're going to put your name. So in my case, it's Alex Curtis in quotes. And then go ahead and click enter, and that's going to save that configuration to the next line. You won't really see much confirmation, but it worked. Okay, so now it's in your global config file. Next, in the next line, you can go ahead and type git config again, -- global, just like before. This time we're going to type user.email, which is going to set the global email that you want to use for your signatures. And then you're going to do the email address, but no quotations this time, okay? You can see my example here of how I did it. Go ahead and click enter, and that's going to save that file. Now, if you're still not sure if you've got everything saved, because they don't really confirm it very well, you can just do git config -l. This is going to list everything just like you saw in the last video, and then you'll know whether or not you've got everything. You can see if that's correct. If it looks correct, that's your global config file. You're ready to start actually working with Git and making some commits and changes. So let's go ahead and we'll do that in part 2.